Welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD Podcast and another segment that we're calling Super Tuesday. We'll be right back with today's guest, but first we want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors. Now, regular listeners know these are companies that I used as an athletic director. They're all great companies. You should be using them too. So take the next 3 minutes, listen to our shout outs, and then more importantly, reach out and connect with these sponsors if you're not already using them. So here we go. We want to say thanks to Athletic Surveys for their support of the podcast. Athletic Surveys are a quick, easy, and an affordable way for you to collect comprehensive data that will allow you to evaluate your entire program. Athletic directors already hear back from the complainers, that 2% that want to gripe about everything. Well, Athletic Surveys will connect you to that 2%, but they'll also connect you to the 98% that support your program. And that is a tremendously valuable tool to have when you're talking with a frustrated parent or your principal or your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that lets you take the pulse of your players and your parents. That's athleticsurveys.com. We also want to say thanks to Huddle. Go to huddle.com and change the way you see the game. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school. And our coaches just loved the tools that Huddle provided that let them coach our kids up to their highest level. Go to huddle.com, join the 8 million users, and turn your school into a Huddle school. We also want to say thanks to our friends at SnapRaise. Go to snapraise.com. Have you ever spent days and weeks on a fundraiser and then got little, if any, return? Stop right there. Go to snapraise.com/EDAD. It's hands down the best online fundraising platform out there. We used it at our school with great success, and so will you. It works. Go to snapraise.com to get started. We want to say thanks to our friends at Home Campus, the exclusive high school and state association management platform. For us, it's also your one-stop platform for things like scheduling, athletic eligibility and clearance, helping parents upload the forms for eligibility paperwork. It's something that I used every single day as an athletic director, and you'll use it too. To get started, all you have to do is go to homecampus.com. That's homecampus.com. We want to say thanks to Sideline Interactive, indoor score tables and video boards. Go to sidelineinteractive.com and schedule a live web demo to see their score tables and their score boards in action. Probably one of the best purchases I ever made was our Sideline Interactive indoor score table. Their products not only generate income for the department, but they also create the ultimate game day experience for your student athletes. That's sidelineinteractive.com. We want to thank Hometown Ticketing. Go to hometownticketing.com. It's the leading digital ticketing provider to schools and colleges. Hometown will give you digital ticketing with more support, more security, more customization. Go to hometownticketing.com. Their team's going to help you make the best solution for online ticketing. We want to say thanks to our friends at Gipper. Go to gipper.com. Start creating world-class content for your school's social media channel. Your kids are online, and if you're not celebrating your teams and promoting your athletes, you're missing out on a great opportunity. Gipper's used and trusted by over 3,000 athletic programs across the country. It's professional graphic design made simple. Go to gipper.com. Mention the podcast. You'll get a nice discount. That's gipper.com. And we want to say thanks to Vital Signs Wall of Fame. Go to their website, vitalsignswalloffame.com. Check out their interactive touchscreen video consoles. It's a great way to showcase your school record boards for all the teams, for all the sports, or your school's Hall of Fame. Go to vitalsignswalloffame.com. Get started using their programs today. That's vitalsignswalloffame.com. Welcome back, everyone, to the Educational AD Podcast and our new series that we're calling Super Tuesday. We've got a team of athletic professionals from a couple different walks of the profession, but very excited today to have Nathan Whitaker back with us. Regular listeners to the podcast know that he is a friend of the show. Had a great interview that's part of our third book, the Athletic Director's Toolbox, third edition. He's got a tremendous background in athletics as a player, as a executive. He's got a Super Bowl ring from his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's also a very successful author, a best-selling author several times over. He's also a speaker of a national and international note, and we just feel very, very fortunate to have him. Nathan Whitaker, welcome back to Super Tuesday.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be back. I appreciate you making an effort to bring me back. It's fun to be on.
Well, again, your experiences and perspective, I think, are of great value to our listeners who are primarily high school and a few college athletic directors. So, welcome back. Thanks for sharing. And what do you have for our listeners this week?
Well, thanks. I thought I'd share today on the concept behind one of my books with Tony Dungy, and you mentioned some of those books. And I, by the way, I appreciate being mentioned in your book. Usually, in order to get mentioned in a book, I have to write the book. So it's nice to have you make me part of the concept. But this book I did with Tony, it was our third book together some years ago, called The Mentor Leader, and it was a topic I had always studied, Tony's leadership style. And even before he agreed to write his memoir, I was putting together notes of what a great leader he was and how he did things so well, and character and values and so many things that anchored his leadership. And so then we wrote his memoir, and then we did a book called Uncommon, a book of values. And then they asked us about doing a leadership book, and Tony said, I don't know if I have anything to share. And I said, actually, you do. And I have all these notes from all these years, and showed them to him. And he said, I'd love to do that. Those are some great ideas. And obviously, of course he liked them since he had come up with most of them. But he said, I'd really like to do it through the lens of mentoring others, that as we're leading, we should be mentoring in order to have effective leadership that lasts over time. And so that was our third book, was called The Mentor Leader. And so if that's all right, I wanted to talk on that a little bit today.
Oh, absolutely.
Great. So just to jump in, the premise behind it is this idea that it's something that should be others focused. And that as we're leading, I think, is at its most basic premise is simply influencing others and having them move toward hopefully a shared and common goal along with us. That if we're not doing it for the right reasons, I think it can quickly become manipulation or intimidation or other things. Last fall, I was in Virginia speaking at military base there, and spoke to the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, U.S. Army TRADOC, on this topic. And they talked about the importance of mentoring others. And this was funny coming from the Army, right? Where I thought, I saw Patton. I know how military leadership is. And they said, look, this is not today's Army. That we really don't believe that intimidation and fear are appropriate ways to lead. And we think, in fact, those are not sustainable models that you can get people to follow for a short period of time if they're trying to avoid the pain of whatever it is that you're, inflicting, whether it's physical, emotional, whatever. I mean, I've been there as a player, right? That yes, coach, whatever you say, I'll do it. But boy, as soon as I had a chance to play for another coach or do something else, or maybe even drop that sport altogether, I was going to do it, because I just didn't want to get beat up figuratively and treated that way. And so I think, to the extent we look at leadership as influence, and then we try to figure out what's going to create a sustainable team, organization, whatever it is, then I think we start to look at, are we building other leaders? And that's where this idea of mentoring comes out. And again, since it's been on my mind, this idea with talking through those folks in the Army, they have created a distinction that I thought was useful for the conversation. It's not one that we have to keep for all time, because I slip between mentoring, leading, teaching, coaching. I use all those terms kind of interchangeably at times. But they had a distinction that they created between coaching and mentoring. And when they talk about coaching in the Army, they say, this is something that's skill specific. We're going to coach you to shoot a rifle. We're going to coach you to drive a tank. We're going to coach you to whatever it is. And we're going to teach you how to do that skill. But then this idea of mentoring is a little more of the soft skills, the personal, professional, the other things where we're going to kind of talk to you and help guide you in some of the ways you can be a better leader, some of the ways you can be better at whatever this other role might be that you have in life. And so this idea of mentoring. And so I started to think through that in terms of my own life. And I had a supervisor at one of my NFL jobs. It was not Tampa Bay. So it was not Tony, and it wasn't, but it was one of my others. And I had a boss there doing salary cap stuff. And he, from the time we started, he was very very intentional about coaching us on some of the skills. And so we would do these mock negotiations. And so, you get ready to call the draft pick, the agent for a draft pick. And I know the money we got allocated to that draft slot and how many years the deal should be. And so, get on this mock phone call with him and we go through the things. And one time you're on the mock phone call and he's arguing about how many years it might be. And the next time you're on the mock phone call and he hangs up, I only want to speak to the GM and I'm not willing to speak to you at all. And you have to deal with all these different situations. And it was great coaching. But then if you ask some of my coworkers and I, the mentoring was non-existent. How do you really structure your life? How do you balance the demands of the NFL with having a young family or whatever it might be? And so it was a great distinction for me to think, boy, there was some great coaching that happened there, but I really had to look for some of the mentoring elsewhere. And so Tony was really intentional in wanting this book and wanting to talk about mentoring. He had an example. He was coaching with the Minnesota Vikings and he had played in the NFL for Chuck Noll in the Pittsburgh Steelers for a couple of years. Then he coached for Coach Noll and had learned a lot. And then he got to the Minnesota Vikings and Denny Green was the head coach and Tony was the defensive coordinator. And Denny said, I really believe in you, as did Coach Noll. But he said, I want to help you become a head coach. And I want you to leave me. I don't want to hang on to you as a defensive coordinator because I want you to have other opportunities and have them soon. And so Denny went out of his way to create opportunities where Tony had to hand out discipline to players, or Tony had to call the league office if there was a question about an officiating call on Sunday. And then on Monday, the coaches will call up and say, why did they call that? Or they shouldn't have called this or whatever it is and get an explanation. So Denny started having Tony make those calls and do those things and then took him along to the league meetings. And all those things added to Denny's workload, right? I mean, it would have been easier for Denny to pick up the phone and to talk to the supervisor officials and get an answer and whatever, then coach Tony through the call, how it's going to go. Here's what we need to make sure we get across on behalf of the Vikings. Here's what we need to do. And then download that from Tony and figure out or on the side of discipline, same thing. I mean, a lot of times in life, it's just faster if we do it ourselves, right? It's just simpler if we do it ourselves. But Denny was like, look, I'm helping build you to become a leader. And so Tony then became very intentional. He hired Herm Edwards as his assistant head coach in Tampa, and then in Indianapolis, Jim Caldwell. And again, started handing them some of these things, even though it was more work for Tony in the short term. In the long run, he was able to hand off more, delegate more, give them more opportunities, and to create a situation where they could thrive. And Tony's whole thought in doing this was that he didn't want to create an organization where if and when he retired or whatever it was that he moved on, he didn't want there to be a leadership vacuum, that he wanted to make sure there were other leaders and the organization continued on without him, which can be scary for some people, right? We want to think we're indispensable and that, if I leave, the whole thing collapses. Well, is that really the best legacy that we want to create? Is that we've created something that dies in our absence, or is it something that we have built up and can be sustained? So just a quick couple of examples of organizations that as Tony and I are writing the book and thinking through this, that in the 80s, certainly, I'm not sure I'd have necessarily wanted to work for Jack Welch at General Electric, but he certainly is a fantastic leader, did a lot of amazing things. And they became a model for leadership. And so when you look at GE of the 80s, a lot of Fortune 100 companies were hiring Jack Welch's number twos or number threes or whatever as their CEOs. And so company after company would look to GE. And so GE had a leadership institute and they were really being very intentional about it. And what they found over time was that they were attracting the best and brightest to come work there because people looked at it as I can come to GE. I don't necessarily have to make that my life's mission to work at GE. And that's okay because others are going to find me there. And so Tony and I were looking at that. We're also looking at the Seattle Seahawks under Pete Carroll. When I was in Tampa, it was one where, to a lesser extent under Tony, I was only with Tony a year in Tampa, but then the next couple of years under Coach Gruden, we were, and it's like a lot of other organizations, we were kind of slow to let people leave. We had them under contract. You'd spend all this time teaching somebody your defense, figuring out your offensive scheme, or how you do things under the salary cap and scouting, and they've been there a year and they're still under contract and they get this other opportunity. And so there were a number of times when we blocked them saying, look, we've invested all this in you and we really at least need to get the second year out of you or whatever it may be. Well, Pete in Seattle has been the opposite. And Pete is kind of like GE, like, hey, come to Seattle, coach here. And if you want to leave the Seahawks and go to a college team or a pro team in a way that's not necessarily a step up, that is either a lateral move or it's kind of a lesser move, but it's a place you want to live or whatever it is, go. And so you see a number of coaches then who are dying to get to Seattle because they're like, look, I'm going to learn from Pete Carroll. And then as I'm learning, I can go and he's going to actually help me with my next step. And so they attract some really fantastic coaches. And those coaches, in fact, there have been a number of examples of coaches who have left to take other positions and then have come back to Seattle because nobody's burning any bridges. They're happy to see them go. They're happy to. And so it's a great model for me of seeing a way in which you get mentored, but the focus is on the person learning. And if they leave, yes, that's going to be painful. And there's going to be, I got to replace you and I got to figure that out. And I've invested all this in you, but you may come back. And even if you don't, I've got these relationships throughout the industry that are positive, worthwhile, and I'm attracting talent as well on the back end. So a few thoughts there on mentoring, why it's important, I think, how it helps create sustainable organizations, how it's different than coaching, and why ultimately I think it benefits all of us in the long run.
Boy, some great points there. And we're going to give out your contact information before we go, but you gave some examples of great mentors who were themselves mentored. I don't think it's just something, well, maybe there is somebody out there. It's just a natural mentor on their own. But I remember early in my career, I certainly was, as a head coach, I was certainly not a mentor of my assistants. It was, hey, we're going to do this and I need you to do that. And it was something that I was able to develop skills for my assistants and help them become better themselves. And again, it's the benefit. It's going to help your team, but it's going to help them go out and become better, men, better coaches, et cetera. What are some tips for you? And I know we don't have a lot of time here, but what are some tips that you could share quickly for someone who's listening that wants to become a better mentor? What sort of tools can you put in their toolbox, to use a phrase, to help them become better mentors themselves to the people they are working with?
Yeah. So I think there are just a couple that come to mind. One is just being intentional about it, right? I mean, thinking through it, that this idea that, people have helped you along the way or whatever, or maybe nobody did, but looking back and thinking it would have been nice if somebody had helped me along the way. And so, this idea of paying it forward, right? I can't necessarily repay the person who helped me, but I could pay it to the next person in line. So this idea of intentionality, I think, empathy and trust, to the extent that I can understand that, these people are trying to work through it. I'm mentoring them because they don't have all the answers. And so I'm trying to understand it, but also I'm being trustworthy that, I think it's hard to mentor if people don't trust you. And that could be as simple as, I think we've all had bosses who, are explosive one day, and then the next day you walk in with something similar, and they're like, "Oh, that's a great thought. Why don't you sit down and we'll talk about it?" And so then by day 3, I'm like, I'm never going in their office again, right? I'm not talking through this because I don't know which leader I'm going to get. And so just being trustworthy as far as people knowing. And then the final point, I think, is to know that in order to mentor, you don't have to have the answers, right? I mean, Clint Hurdle said to me one time, he said, one of the best ways to make good decisions is to have really good experience. and how do you get really good experience to make some really bad decisions. And so this idea of mentoring, that I don't have to have it figured out, that sometimes as a parent, I think, well, I can't really help my kids with this because I made such poor decisions. And you're like, wait, that's exactly why I can help them through this. Because I didn't have it all figured out, and I still don't have it figured out. But to the extent we're helping people and walking alongside them, I think this idea that this humility that I don't have all the answers, but I've got some, and I can share those, and they may work for you, and they may not, and we'll figure it out as we go. So those would be some of the things that come to mind.
Right. I mean, again, that cliche, and it's a cliche because it's true. Somebody asks you a question, and your response is, "Hey, I don't know, but let's find out together." Just so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, thanks so much for sharing. If one of our listeners wanted to reach out, find out a little bit more about you and your programs and your books, of course, what's the best way that they can do that?
Sure. My website is www.nathanwhitaker.com. It's got way more information about me than you probably would ever want to know, but it's a way you can reach me, learn more about me, see clips of me speaking. And so I'd love to hear back from any of your listeners. That'd be fantastic.
Okay. And again, all the books, Quiet Strength, the Leadership Series with Tony Dungy, they're all on Amazon.com. And want to really emphasize the speaking part. If you're looking for a great speaker to come in, talk to your parents, your coaches, your students, your community, go to Nathan's website and check it out. You'd be glad that you did. Nathan, thanks as always for sharing, and all the best moving forward with 2024.
Thanks, Jake. So good to always be a part of Super Tuesday. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, no, we appreciate it. For our listeners, we appreciate you listening, and we also upload these Zoom recordings to the Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. We do it every week, so come back next week for another great Super Tuesday guest, and just about every day for new content on the Educational AD Podcast. We'll see you next time. Boy, that was so much fun. Please go to Nathan's website, check out his programs, his books. You'll be very glad that you did. Before we go, you'll be glad that we mention our sponsors one more time. Again, these are companies that I used as an athletic director. You should really think about using them if you're not. Let's say thanks to Home Campus. Go to homecampus.com. We want to thank Snap Raise, the fundraising platform. That's snapraise.com. I want to say thank you to Gipper. Go to Gipper.com. Start creating world-class content for your school's social media channel. We want to thank Huddle, whether it's video or streaming or the many other things that Huddle can do for you. Go to huddle.com. You'll be glad you did. I want to thank Vital Signs Wall of Fame. Go to vitalsignswalloffame.com. Mention the podcast. You'll get a nice discount. Hometown Ticketing is the leading digital ticketing provider to schools and colleges. Go to hometownticketing.com to get started. And we want to thank Athletic Surveys by LifeTrack. Go to athleticsurveys.com. Let them create a custom survey that'll let you take the pulse of your parents and your student athletes. Thanks again for listening to this segment of Super Tuesday on the Educational AD Podcast. We will see you next time.